"The money was never meant for someone like you," my father said coldly, sliding the college fund statement across the kitchen table toward my sister. My mother nodded in agreement, not even meeting my eyes. "Academic scholarships are for real students, Olivia, not for dreamers." 17 years of being their daughter, and in that moment, I became invisible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember every detail of that spring afternoon. The eastern way. Sunlight streamed through our kitchen windows, casting a golden glow that felt cruelly at odds with the conversation. The faint scent of my mother's signature lemon bars cooling on the counter. A celebration for my sister Ellie's acceptance to Princeton. The sound of neighborhood children playing outside, their laughter floating through open windows as my world silently collapsed. My hands trembled as I stood there, acceptance letter from Rhode Island School of Design clutched so tightly in my fingers that the paper crumpled. I'd been waiting for this moment for months, the culmination of countless all-nighters perfecting my portfolio, of years dedicated to developing my artistic voice. Rice-D had been my dream since I was 12, when a visiting artist came to my middle school and told me I had real talent. I'd worked with singular focus toward this goal, believing my parents' promise that they had been saving for both their daughters' futures. "But you always said the college fund was for both of us," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. I got in. I actually got in. I placed my acceptance letter next to Ellie's Princeton package, which sat prominently displayed in the center of the table, adorned with congratulatory flowers. "We said it was for college," my mother corrected, finally looking at me with an expression of practiced patience. "Real college, medicine, law, business, something with a future. Not art school." "Art school is college," I countered, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. "One of the best in the country." My father leaned forward, resting his elbows on the kitchen table we'd gathered around for family dinners my entire life. His voice took on the same tone he used when explaining particularly complex concepts to clients at his law firm. Slow, deliberate, as if speaking to someone who couldn't possibly understand. "Olivia, be reasonable. Your sister has worked toward Princeton since she started high school. Perfect GPA, debate team captain, volunteer work at the hospital. She's going to become a surgeon, following in your grandfather's footsteps. That's an investment in a real future." Ellie sat uncomfortably beside him, eyes fixed on her acceptance package. To her credit, she looked genuinely conflicted, but she remained silent, a silence that spoke volumes. "And what I've worked for isn't real?" The question hung in the air between us. My mother sighed, exchanging a glance with my father that contained volumes of shared disappointment. "Drawing pictures isn't a career, honey. It's a hobby. A very expensive hobby we simply can't justify funding when Ellie has this opportunity." The calculated dismissal in her voice, the way she reduced years of my passionate work to drawing pictures, struck deeper than simple anger could reach. This wasn't a new conversation. It was merely the culmination of a lifetime of subtle signals that my interests were less valuable, my talents less worthy of investment. "The decision is final," my father added, in the same tone he used to close arguments in court. "The college fund will cover Ellie's tuition at Princeton. If you're serious about this art school, you'll need to find another way." I looked at Ellie then, searching her face for some sign of solidarity, some acknowledgement of the injustice unfolding between us. My sister and I had never been close, our interests too different, our temperaments opposed. But we'd always maintained a baseline respect for each other's aspirations. Now, as she finally met my gaze, I saw a complex mixture of guilt and relief in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Liv," she said quietly. "Maybe you could apply for scholarships." Her suggestion, well-intentioned, but painfully naive, was the final straw. Art school scholarships were notoriously competitive, and most application deadlines had already passed. She knew this. We'd discussed it during one of our rare sisterly conversations months ago. Something shifted inside me then. Something fundamental and irreversible. The hurt crystallized into a cold clarity I'd never experienced before. I carefully smoothed out my crumpled acceptance letter, folded it precisely along its original lines, and slipped it back into its envelope. "Congratulations on Princeton, Ellie," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I hope it's everything you've worked for." I turned to my parents, making deliberate eye contact with each of them. "I won't forget this." It wasn't a threat, merely a promise to myself that I verbalized aloud. Without waiting for their response, I walked out of the kitchen, up the stairs to my bedroom, and closed the door quietly behind me. No slamming, no teenage drama, just the soft click of a chapter ending. That evening, as I sat cross-legged on my bed surrounded by sketchbooks and half-finished canvases, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. If my art wasn't real enough for my parents' support, I would make it undeniably real through sheer force of will and talent. I would find my own way to RISD, and beyond that, to a life where my vision was not just acknowledged but valued. I drafted emails to my art teachers seeking advice about emergency scholarships. I researched loan options until my eyes burned from screen glare. I calculated exactly how much money I had saved from my part-time job at the local gallery, and how many additional hours I would need to work to make up even a fraction of the difference. The numbers were daunting, nearly impossible, but I refused to let that reality extinguish the fire that had been lit within me. Around midnight, a soft knock sounded at my door. I knew it was Ellie before she entered, recognized her hesitant pattern. "Can I come in?" she asked, voice uncharacteristically tentative. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without letting the hurt leak into my words. She entered cautiously, perching on the edge of my desk chair as if afraid to take up space in my domain. "What they did wasn't fair," she said finally, surprising me with her directness. "I told them that after you left." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for more. "I offered to split it," she continued, twisting her hands in her lap. "The fund, but Dad said it wouldn't be enough for both of us then, and it would jeopardize my chances at med school later if I had to take on undergrad debt." "And you agreed with him," I concluded. It wasn't a question. She looked down. "I don't know what's right anymore, Liv. I've wanted Princeton since I was a kid. You know that." "And I've wanted RISD just as long," I countered. "The difference is, I always assumed I'd have to work twice as hard to prove my dream was worthwhile. Turns out no amount of work would have been enough." Ellie flinched at the truth in my words. "What will you do?" I gestured to my laptop screen, open to a student loan calculator displaying numbers that made my stomach twist with anxiety. "Whatever I have to do." She nodded slowly, then reached into the pocket of her sweatshirt and withdrew a folded check. "It's not much," she said, placing it on my bedspread. "Just what I've saved from tutoring. Maybe it'll help with books or supplies or something." The check was for $2,300, nearly everything she'd earned over 2 years of tutoring struggling. Students in advanced chemistry and calculus. It was simultaneously a tremendous gesture and completely insufficient for the mountain I needed to climb. The complexity of emotions it triggered, gratitude, resentment, love, and lingering betrayal, was almost too much to process. "I can't." "Take this," I said, pushing the check back toward her. "Please," she insisted. "It's the only way I can look at myself in the mirror right now." I understood then that this wasn't really about helping me. It was about alleviating her guilt. Still, her attempt at solidarity meant something in a house where I suddenly felt utterly alone. "Thank you," I said finally, taking the check without promising to use it. "But this doesn't fix what happened." "I know," she said quietly, standing to leave. At the door, she paused. For what it's worth, I've always thought your art was extraordinary, even when I didn't understand it. After she left, I sat in the stillness of my room, surrounded by evidence of a passion my family couldn't or wouldn't value. On my walls hung pieces I'd created over years of dedicated practice. Charcoal studies of human anatomy that rivaled medical textbook illustrations, oil paintings that captured light in ways that made viewers stop and stare. Digital concept art that had earned me recognition in national student competitions. This wasn't a hobby. It was my voice, my purpose. I opened my laptop again and began typing an email to Professor Kendrick, my AP art teacher and mentor. Subject line: Emergency Plan for RISD. I worked until dawn, outlining a path forward that would require extraordinary sacrifice but would get me where I needed to go, with or without my family's support. The next morning, I emerged from my room with puffy eyes but renewed determination. I found my mother alone in the kitchen, preparing her usual Saturday morning breakfast of avocado toast and coffee. "I've made arrangements," I announced without preamble. "I'll be attending RISD in the fall." She turned, surprise evident on her face. "Olivia, we discussed this. Without the college fund—" "I don't need your college fund," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "I've applied for emergency scholarships, secured a higher-paying position at the gallery, and I'll be taking out loans for the remainder. Professor, Kendrick is helping me apply for a special departmental grant." My mother's expression shifted from surprise to concern. "Loans? Olivia? That's decades of debt for a degree that might not— That might not what, Mom? Lead to a real career? Make me as successful as Ellie?" I maintained steady eye contact. "I believe in my talent enough to bet on myself, even if you and Dad don't." A flicker of something, hurt perhaps, or recognition passed across her face. "We want what's best for you." "No," I corrected gently. "You want what you think is best for me. There's a difference." I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. "Your father and I can't support this decision, Olivia, financially or otherwise." I absorbed the impact of her words, the finality of the fracture between us. When I spoke, again my voice was soft but unwavering. "Then I'll succeed without your support, and when I do, I hope you'll remember this moment." The months that followed were the hardest of my life. I worked 30 hours a week at the gallery while completing my senior year of high school. I sold commissioned artwork online, stayed up until midnight completing scholarship applications, and met weekly with Professor Kendrick to refine my portfolio for additional grant opportunities. By graduation day, I had cobbled together enough money through scholarships, loans, and saved earnings to cover my first year at RISD. Beyond that, stretched a financial uncertainty that kept me awake at night, but I refused to dwell on it during the ceremony. As I crossed the stage to receive my diploma, I heard my family's applause. Polite but restrained. Nothing like the enthusiastic cheers that had erupted for Ellie's graduation the year before. At the obligatory celebration dinner afterward, conversation revolved almost entirely around Ellie's first-year successes at Princeton and her upcoming summer internship at the university hospital. "And what about you, Olivia?" my father's colleague asked kindly. "Where are you headed in the fall?" Before I could answer, my father interjected smoothly. "Olivia's taking some time to explore her options. She's very creative." The dismissal, in his diplomatic evasion, was unmistakable. I met his gaze across the table, a silent confrontation passing between us. "Actually," I said clearly, ensuring everyone at the table could hear, "I'll be attending Rhode Island School of Design in the fall." I've received their presidential scholarship and several grants for my portfolio work. A moment of awkward silence followed as my parents forced smiles, clearly blindsided by both my announcement and the prestigious scholarships they hadn't known about. "That's wonderful," my father's colleague replied, genuinely impressed. "RISD is extraordinarily selective. Congratulations." "Thank you," I said, maintaining eye contact with my father. "I'm very proud to have earned my place there." The emphasis on earned was subtle, but unmistakable. Something shifted in my father's expression then. Not quite respect, but perhaps the first glimmer of recognition that I might not conform to his narrative after all. 2 months later, I moved into my dorm at RISD with everything I owned packed into my decade-old Honda Civic. My parents had offered a perfunctory help with moving, but I declined, preferring the clean break of independence. Ellie came, though, helping me carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs and arranging my art supplies with surprising care. As we set up my tiny dorm room, transforming the sterile space into a functional studio, she paused while hanging a series of my sketches. "They're wrong about you, Liv," she said suddenly. "I just want you to know that." I looked up from where I was assembling a desk lamp. "It doesn't matter anymore. This is my path now." She shook her head. "It does matter. Family always matters, even when they're wrong." She hesitated, then added, "I don't want to lose my sister because they couldn't see what was right in front of them." Something in her sincerity touched a part of me I'd been trying to harden against disappointment. "You're not losing me," I said finally, "but I need to do this my way, without looking back for their approval." When everything was arranged, we stood in the center of my new space, a room filled with potential and possibility despite its modest size. "Make them regret ever doubting you," Ellie said, hugging me goodbye with unexpected fierceness. And that's exactly what I intended to do. My first semester at RISD was a revelation. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who spoke my creative language, who understood the compulsion to translate vision into visual reality. My professors pushed me beyond what I thought possible, identifying weaknesses in my technique while nurturing my distinctive perspective. Late-night critiques in studio spaces became sacred ground for growth, each challenging comment forcing me to defend my artistic choices or evolve my approach. Financially, every month was a precarious balance. My remote work for the gallery back home barely covered essentials, and I took on additional freelance illustration jobs whenever they appeared. I ate ramen more often than not, mastered the art of making coffee last an entire day, and became intimately familiar with the campus food pantry that supported struggling students. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving that first year, claiming too much work, but truthfully unable to afford the gas for the drive. Instead, I stayed in the nearly empty dorm, using the quiet time to complete a commissioned piece that would pay for next month's phone bill. My parents sent a brief text wishing me well. Ellie called from our family dinner table, holding up her phone so I could see familiar dishes and decorations from afar. "They ask about you," she said when she retreated to our childhood bedroom. "For privacy. More than you think." "Asking isn't the same as understanding," I replied, brush in hand as I spoke. "Or supporting." "I know," she conceded. "Just don't shut the door completely, Liv. People can surprise you." I doubted my parents had much capacity to surprise me anymore, but I kept that thought to myself. "Enjoy Mom's pumpkin pie for me," I said instead, changing the subject. By the end of my freshman year, I had not only survived but begun to distinguish myself. My final project for foundation studies received the department's Excellence Award, and one of my professors recommended me for a coveted summer internship with a Providence design firm. The position was unpaid, but the experience and connections would be invaluable. I called home with this news, hopeful despite myself for some acknowledgement of my progress. "An unpaid internship?" my father questioned after my announcement. "That doesn't seem very practical, Olivia. How will you support yourself this summer?" The familiar disappointment settled over me like an old sweater, uncomfortable but expected. "I've arranged evening and weekend work at a local cafe," I explained. "The internship is highly competitive. Only 3 students were selected." "Well, that's nice," my mother interjected, her tone suggesting it was anything but impressive. "Ellie was just accepted to a research program at Johns Hopkins for the summer. Fully funded, with a stipend." "Congratulations to Ellie," I said flatly. "I have to go. Studio hours are ending soon." I ended the call before either could respond, swallowing the familiar ache of being measured against my sister and found wanting. That evening, I channeled my frustration into a series of expressive charcoal drawings that my studio professor later described as breakthrough work, raw with authentic emotional resonance. The pattern continued through my sophomore year. Academic and creative successes met with lukewarm acknowledgement from my parents, financial struggles that kept me constantly on edge, and a growing recognition among faculty that my work had distinctive potential. I won a small departmental scholarship that eased some pressure, and my cafe job became steady enough to ensure basic stability. During winter break of that year, I returned home briefly for Christmas, my first extended stay since leaving for college. The experience was a study in emotional dissonance, physically present in my childhood home while feeling fundamentally disconnected from family traditions that once defined my sense of belonging. On Christmas morning, as we exchanged gifts, around our meticulously decorated tree, my father handed me a small envelope with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Your mother and I thought this might be useful," he said, his tone carefully neutral. Inside was a check for $500, a sum that would meaningfully impact my tight budget, but represented a fraction of what they regularly sent Ellie. The amount itself didn't hurt as much as the accompanying note. For practical expenses, even their financial support came with implicit judgment, the suggestion that my artistic pursuits remained separate from practical reality, that my education was still a deviation from the path they valued. "Thank you," I said simply, tucking the check into my pocket without elaboration. Later that day, Ellie found me in our shared bathroom, applying makeup for the extended family dinner to come. "I saw what they gave you," she said, leaning against the doorframe. It's fine," I interrupted, not wanting her pity. "I'm doing okay on my own." She studied me in the mirror. "Are you? Really?" I met her reflected gaze. "I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do. So yes, I'm more than okay." Something in my conviction seemed to satisfy her. "Your artwork is changing," she observed. "The pieces you brought home, they're different, stronger." I nodded, surprised by her perception. "I'm finding my voice." "It's a powerful one," she said simply. The conversation shifted something subtle between us, establishing a connection based on mutual respect rather than shared history alone. For the first time, I felt Ellie seeing me clearly, without the distorting lens of our parents' expectations. When I returned to Wrist after break, I carried that recognition with me, a small but significant validation that fueled my creative momentum through the challenges ahead. I threw myself into my studies with renewed intensity, specializing in illustration with a focus on narrative visual storytelling. By the end of my junior year, my work had begun attracting attention beyond campus. One of my illustrated short stories won a regional student competition, resulting in publication and a modest prize. A series of my conceptual character designs was featured in an industry blog highlighting emerging talent. Small successes began accumulating into something that resembled professional momentum. I saved the competition magazine with my published work, intending to send it home as tangible proof of my progress. But after wrapping it carefully and addressing the package, I found myself unable to mail it. The need for parental validation once so central to my emotional landscape, had begun to recede like a tide pulling back from shore. I was creating my own measure of success now, one that didn't require their understanding to be legitimate. Instead, I focused on the growing network of mentors, peers, and industry connections who recognized and valued my talent. Professor Martinez, my illustration advisor, became particularly instrumental, recommending me for client projects that built my portfolio and provided crucial real-world experience. Under her guidance, I developed a distinctive style that merged traditional fine art techniques with contemporary digital approaches, work that increasingly attracted commercial interest. The summer before my senior year marked a turning point. I secured a paid internship with Meridian Publishing in Boston, working in their visual development department for children's literature. The position not only provided financial relief, but offered a glimpse into exactly the career path I hoped to pursue after graduation. My supervisor at Meridian, creative director Ramona Vasquez, took particular interest in my development, assigning me increasingly substantial responsibilities. As the summer progressed, "You have something special, Olivia," she told me during my mid-internship review. "A unique perspective combined with technical skill and work ethic. That's a rare combination." As the internship neared its end, Ramona called me into her office for what I assumed would be a standard final evaluation. Instead, she presented an unexpected opportunity. "We'd like to offer you a part-time position during your senior year," she said. "Remote work, 15 hours weekly, focusing on initial concept development for our new middle grade series. It would transition to full-time after graduation, assuming all goes well." The offer represented everything I had been working toward: professional validation, creative opportunity, and financial security that would help me manage my final year of school and the looming reality of student loan repayment. More than that, it was confirmation that my decision to pursue my passion, despite all obstacles, had been the right one. I accepted immediately, my mind already racing with possibilities. As I left Ramona's office, I pulled out my phone with uncharacteristic impulse and called home. My father answered, his voice distracted as usual. "Olivia, hello. Everything all right?" "Everything's excellent, actually," I replied, unable to contain my excitement. "I've been offered a position with Meridian Publishing, part-time through my senior year, then full-time after graduation. It's exactly what I've been working toward." A beat of silence followed. Then, "Publishing? Is that sustainable as a career?" The familiar deflation began, but I refused to let it diminish this moment. Meridian is one of the largest educational publishers in the country. Their starting salary for full-time illustrators is competitive, with benefits and growth potential. "I see," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "Well, that's unexpected." "It's actually exactly what I expected," I countered, "when I chose to attend one of the best art schools in the country." Another pause. "Your mother will want to hear about this." "Hold on." I heard muffled conversation, then my mother's voice came on the line. "Olivia? Dad says you have news about a job?" I repeated the information, emphasizing the competitive nature of the position and the validation it represented for my chosen path. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose we've been wrong about some things, haven't we?" It wasn't quite an apology, but something in her tone suggested the first crack in the wall of dismissal they had built around my career choice. A tentative opening, perhaps, to a new understanding. "I'd like to think I've proven my point," I said carefully. "Art isn't just a hobby for me. It's a viable profession and my genuine calling." "You've certainly shown determination," she acknowledged. "We'll want to hear more details, of course." We spoke for a few more minutes, the conversation stilted but missing the usual undercurrent of disapproval. When we hung up, I stood on the busy Boston sidewalk, people flowing around me as I processed what had transpired. Not validation exactly, but perhaps the beginning of reassessment. That evening, as I packed my apartment for the return to Providence, My phone pinged with a text from Ellie. "Dad called me about your job offer. I told him Meridian is practically the Harvard of publishing houses. Pretty sure he's Googling them. Right now. Proud of you, sis." I smiled at her message, appreciating her advocacy even as I recognized it shouldn't have been necessary. The fact that my father needed external validation of my accomplishment, comparison to an institution he respected, rather than simply taking pride in my achievement, spoke volumes about the work still to be done. My senior year at RISD unfolded, with new purpose and direction. Balancing coursework with my position at Meridian pushed me to new levels of discipline and creativity. My thesis project, a fully illustrated children's novel exploring themes of personal identity and belonging, evolved into what my advisors described as portfolio-defining work. Throughout the year, my communications with my parents remained cordial but distant. They inquired about my job more frequently than my artistic development, focusing on the concrete aspects they could understand: hours, responsibilities, future, security. I answered their questions directly, but maintained emotional boundaries, protecting my creative process from their lingering skepticism. Graduation approached with a mixture of triumph and vindication. I had not only survived my college, years against financial odds, but had secured professional success on my own terms. As I sent out family invitations to the ceremony, I included a formal announcement of my thesis exhibition, a showcase for graduating illustrators that would feature my work prominently. 3 days before graduation, I received an unexpected call from my father. "Your mother and I were thinking," he began, uncharacteristic hesitation in his voice. "Since you'll be starting your full-time position soon, perhaps we should discuss your student loans." I tensed, unsure where this was heading. "What about them?" "We'd like to help," he said simply. "We've been setting aside some money, and we thought we might contribute to paying them down, as a graduation gift." The offer caught me completely off guard. After years of financial independence forced by their refusal to support my education, this sudden gesture seemed almost surreal. "Why now?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Why not when it would have spared me years of working multiple jobs while trying to complete one of the most demanding programs in the country? He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Your mother and I have been reevaluating some of our positions. Ellie has been quite vocal about her perspective on our handling of your education." "So this is because of Ellie's influence?" The thought that my sister had been advocating for me behind the scenes was both touching and frustrating. "Partly," he admitted, "but also because we've seen what you've accomplished against significant obstacles that, frankly, we placed in your path." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd received in 5 years. "The exhibition catalog for your thesis show arrived yesterday," he continued. "We looked through it together. Your work is remarkable, Olivia. More sophisticated and impactful than we had understood art could be." I closed my eyes, absorbing the validation I had stopped allowing myself to need. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means more than you know." "We'd like to attend the exhibition," he added, "before the graduation ceremony, if that would be acceptable to you." "I'd like that," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. As I hung up, I found myself staring at the final illustration from my thesis project, an image of a young woman standing at a crossroads, one path leading toward safety and conformity, the other toward a horizon bright with uncertain possibility. I had unconsciously given the figure my own features, though I hadn't realized it until my advisor pointed it out during critique. I touched the image gently, tracing the path the figure had clearly chosen, the one leading toward light and possibility. 5 years ago, when my parents had redirected my college fund to my sister and dismissed my artistic ambitions as unworthy of investment, they had unwittingly set me on a journey of self-reliance and determination that had forged me into something stronger than compliance ever could have. The money had never been meant for someone like me, they had said. They were right, though not in the way they had intended. I hadn't needed their financial support to succeed. I had needed the fire of proving them wrong. And in that fire, I had been transformed from a girl seeking approval into a woman who created her own definition of success. As I prepared for their visit, for the moment they would finally see my work, my world, through new eyes, I realized I had surpassed the need for their validation. I welcomed it now, not as confirmation of my worth, but as the beginning of a new relationship based on who I had become, not who they had expected me to be. The betrayal that had once defined me had become merely the opening chapter in a story of my own creation, one illustrated with determination, resilience, and the unyielding belief in my own creative voice. The morning of my thesis exhibition dawned with a clarity that seemed fitting for such a pivotal day. Through my apartment window, Providence revealed itself in perfect spring glory, dogwoods blooming along the streets, sunlight glinting off, the river, the historic buildings of RISD's campus standing in testament to generations of artists who had come before me. In a few hours, my parents would see my work displayed in the Warren Gallery, the culmination of 4 years of relentless dedication. I stood before the mirror, adjusting the vintage navy dress I'd found at a thrift store and carefully restored for special occasions. The woman reflected back at me bore little resemblance to the devastated 17-year-old who had watched her dreams seemingly collapse around her in that sunlit kitchen. My posture was straighter, my gaze more direct. The constant anxiety that had once shadowed my features had been replaced by the quiet confidence of someone who had built her life deliberately, brick by determined brick. "You've got this," I whispered to my reflection, a ritual of self-assurance I developed during countless all-nighters and moments of doubt throughout my college years. My phone buzzed with a text from Ellie. "On our way. Mom changed outfits 3 times. Dad actually wearing his special occasion tie. They're nervous." The image of my typically self-assured parents feeling anxious about meeting me made me smile despite myself. They should be nervous. They were entering my world now, a world they had dismissed, a reality they had refused to support, and a success they had never anticipated. I arrived at the gallery an hour early to ensure everything was perfectly in place. My thesis project, titled The Invisible Thread, A Visual Journey of Identity, occupied the southwest corner of the space, prime, positioning awarded by the faculty committee who had reviewed our proposals. The installation featured 15 illustrations that together formed a narrative about a young woman discovering her unique voice in a world of prescribed expectations. The parallels to my own journey weren't subtle, but the artwork transcended. Mere autobiography to touch on universal themes of self-discovery and authenticity. Professor Martinez was already there, supervising final adjustments to the lighting. She spotted me and waved, her face breaking into a proud smile. "Your moment has arrived, Olivia," she said, embracing me briefly. "How are you feeling?" "Ready?" I replied, surprised by how true it felt. "My family is coming. My parents, I mean." Understanding flickered in her eyes. She was one of the few people who knew the full story of my estrangement, having become both mentor and confidant during my most difficult semesters. "Are you prepared for that?" she asked carefully. I nodded, surveying my displayed work. "They need to see this. Not for my validation anymore, but for their own understanding. They need to see what they nearly prevented from existing." She squeezed my shoulder, her expression solemn. "Remember that regardless of their reaction, this work stands on its own merit. The offers you've received speak to that." She was referring to the 3 job opportunities that had emerged following my portfolio reviews, positions more prestigious than even my arrangement with Meridian. One in particular, with renowned animation studio Prismatic Dreams in California, represented a career trajectory I hadn't dared to imagine possible 4 years ago. I know, I assured her. Their opinion isn't my measure anymore. As other students began arriving with their families, the gallery filled with excited voices and the palpable anticipation that accompanies milestone moments. I greeted classmates and faculty, exchanged congratulations, and answered questions from visitors about my artistic process, all while keeping one eye on the entrance. At precisely 3:30 p.m. they arrived. My father entered first, scanning the room with the analytical precision that characterized his approach to unfamiliar situations. My mother followed, dressed more formally than the occasion required, her expression a careful mask of polite interest. Ellie came last, her eyes immediately finding mine across the crowded space, offering an encouraging smile. I took a deep breath and walked toward them, navigating between clusters of attendees. My father spotted me first, his posture stiffening. Slightly, whether from discomfort or an attempt at formality, I couldn't tell. "Olivia," he said, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone I remembered, though somewhat tempered. "The gallery is impressive." "Thank you for coming," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "My work is in the southwest corner. Would you like to see it now? Or would you prefer something to drink first?" "Let's see your work," my mother interjected, her eyes taking in the space with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. That's why we're here, after all. I led them through the gallery, acutely aware of the contrast between my parents' formal attire and the creative, eclectic atmosphere of the exhibition. They seemed out of place, like visitors from another planet attempting to interpret alien customs. Ellie, by contrast, moved with comfortable ease, having visited my studios and attended my smaller shows whenever her schedule permitted. When we reached my installation, I stepped back, allowing them to experience the work without my narration. The sequence began with a tightly rendered illustration of a young woman confined within a glass box, surrounded by ghostly hands pointing toward different directions. Each subsequent image showed her progression, first noticing the cracks in the glass, then testing its strength, eventually shattering her confinement and gathering the fragments to construct a pair of wings. The final piece showed her soaring above a landscape where other glass boxes contained shadowy figures, some looking up at her flight with expressions of wonder or longing. My father moved methodically from one illustration to the next, his brow furrowed in concentration. My mother lingered before the third piece, where the protagonist discovers her reflection in the glass is different from the image others perceive, her hand unconsciously touching her throat in what appeared to be recognition. Ellie circled the entire display twice, absorbing details I knew only other artists typically noticed. "The technical skill is extraordinary, Liv," she said finally, breaking the silence. "But it's the emotional impact that's just... wow." My father cleared his throat, turning to face me. His expression was difficult to read, a complex mixture of emotions I had never seen on his usually decisive features. "This is..." he began, then paused, seeming to search for adequate words. "This is far beyond what I had imagined. There's remarkable sophistication in both the execution and the conceptual framework. Coming from my father, this analytical assessment was high. Praise indeed." I nodded acknowledgement, waiting for more. "The protagonist," my mother said quietly, still studying the fourth illustration where the woman begins breaking her glass prison. "She looks like you." "She is me, in many ways," I confirmed, "though she represents anyone who has had to break free of other people's expectations to find their authentic self." My mother's eyes met mine, a flash of painful understanding passing between us. "I see that now." Professor Martinez approached then, intuiting the perfect moment to intercede. "You must be Olivia's family," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Elena Martinez, chair of the illustration department and Olivia's thesis advisor." My father shook her hand, slipping easily into his professional demeanor. Richard Bennett. This is my wife, Margaret, and our other daughter, Eleanor. Professor Martinez has been instrumental in my development, I explained. She's the one who connected me with Meridian Publishing. Olivia has been one of our most promising students, Professor Martinez said, her tone warmly professional, but leaving no room for doubt. Her portfolio has generated exceptional interest from industry leaders. Just yesterday, I received another inquiry about her availability post-graduation. I watched my parents' expressions shift as they processed this information. External. Validation from an authority figure clearly registering in a way my own assertions never could. We're beginning to understand that, my father said carefully. The quality of her work is remarkable. Not just the quality, Professor Martinez corrected gently. The voice. Olivia has developed a distinctive creative perspective that's quite rare, particularly in someone so young. That's what companies like Prismatic Dreams are responding to. Prismatic Dreams? My mother's attention sharpened. I'm not familiar with that name. They're one of the most innovative animation studios in the industry, Ellie interjected before I could respond. They worked on that film series Aiden loves, you know, the one about the underwater civilization. Their art direction won an Academy Award last year. My parents' expressions registered surprise, both at the information itself and at Ellie's knowledge of my industry. I shot her a grateful look, appreciating yet again how she had become my unexpected advocate. Olivia has several excellent opportunities to consider, Professor Martinez confirmed. Though I should let her tell you about those herself. If you'll excuse me, I need to speak with some other families. As she departed, my father turned to me with newfound curiosity. You have multiple offers? I nodded, allowing myself a small, confident smile. 3, currently. Meridian has extended their part-time position to a full-time role with advancement potential. Westbrook Illustrated Media in New York has offered a junior concept artist position, and Prismatic Dreams in Los Angeles is interested in me for their visual development team. Los Angeles, my mother repeated, as if testing the distance in her mouth. That's quite far. It's also the most prestigious opportunity, I said evenly. Their starting salary would allow me to repay my student loans within 5 years while working on projects that would significantly advance my career. A flash of discomfort crossed my father's face at the mention of student loans, the burden he had once dismissed as the reasonable consequence of my impractical choices. About those loans, he began, his voice dropping slightly. Your mother and I would like to discuss our offer to help with them, perhaps over dinner after the exhibition. I'd like that, I agreed, surprising myself with the genuine sentiment behind my words. We were interrupted by the approach of Dean Wallace, the head of the Fine Arts Division. Ms. Bennett, congratulations on an outstanding exhibition, he said, nodding politely to my family. I wanted to inform you that the Lockhart Foundation representative was particularly impressed with your work. They've indicated interest in discussing their emerging artist grant with you. After he moved on, Ellie nudged me excitedly. The Lockhart Foundation, isn't that a big deal? Very big, I confirmed, unable to suppress a smile. Their grants provide funding for independent projects alongside mentorship from established artists. It's highly competitive. For the next hour, my family observed as various faculty members, industry representatives, and fellow students approached me with congratulations, questions about my process, and expressions of interest in future collaboration. With each interaction, I watched my parents' perception visibly shifting, their daughter emerging before their eyes as a respected professional in a world they had never bothered to understand. As the exhibition began winding down, Ellie pulled me aside while our parents spoke with another faculty member. They get it now, she said quietly. Or they're starting to. I've never seen Dad speechless before. It shouldn't have taken all this, I replied, gesturing around us. They should have believed in me from the beginning. Ellie nodded, her expression somber. You're right. But they're here now trying to understand. That's not nothing. No, I agreed after a moment. It's not nothing. Later, at dinner in a small Italian restaurant near campus, the conversation flowed more easily than it had in years. My parents asked genuine questions about my creative process, my career prospects, and my experience at RISD. Their interest, though belated, felt sincere. When dessert arrived, my father set his fork down and straightened slightly, his characteristic gesture before addressing important matters. Olivia, he began, his voice more hesitant than I was accustomed to hearing. Your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking over the past few months. Seeing your work today, understanding the level of skill and vision it represents, has only confirmed what we've gradually been realizing. My mother reached for his hand, a silent gesture of support. We were wrong, he continued simply. Wrong to dismiss your passion as impractical, wrong to withhold support when you needed it most, and wrong to measure your path against conventional standards of success. The words I had once desperately needed to hear now washed over me with complicated emotions. Vindication mingled with the lingering ache of years spent proving my worth. We'd like to make amends, in whatever way possible, my mother added. Starting with your student loans, we want to pay them in full, immediately. I set down my water glass carefully. That's a substantial amount. We're aware, my father acknowledged. It's what we should have contributed to your education from the beginning. The fact that you've come this far without our support is testament to your determination, but you shouldn't have had to struggle so hard. The money would make a significant difference, I admitted after a moment's consideration. Especially with relocation costs if I accept the position in Los Angeles. Then it's settled, my father said, relief evident in his tone. We'll make arrangements this week. Have you decided which offer you'll accept? My mother asked, clearly trying to engage with my career decisions in a way she never had before. I'm leaning toward prismatic dreams, I answered honestly. The creative opportunities there align most closely with my long-term goals, and Los Angeles has a thriving illustration community. And the Lockhart grant? Ellie prompted. Could you do both? Potentially. The grant would fund independent projects outside my studio work. It would mean an intense schedule, but the creative freedom would be worth it. My father nodded slowly, considering this. That sounds reminiscent of how I approached my early career in law, taking pro bono cases that interested me while building my position at the firm. The comparison, his first acknowledgement of parallels between our professional paths, caught me by surprise. I suppose there are similarities, I agreed cautiously. Different fields, similar dedication, he said, meeting my gaze directly. I recognize that now. After dinner, as we stood outside the restaurant in the gentle spring evening, my mother embraced me with uncharacteristic emotion. We're proud of you, Olivia, she whispered. I know that's hard to believe after everything, but we truly are. The words settled around me like a coat I wasn't sure still fit, too long desired to be easily discarded, too late delivered to be fully embraced. Thank you, I said simply, neither rejecting nor fully accepting the overture. My father shook my hand formally, then awkwardly pulled me into a brief hug. Whatever you decide about the job offers, we support your choice, he said, and we'd like to visit wherever you land. As they drove away, Ellie lingered behind. That went better than expected, she observed. It did, I agreed, still processing. Though it doesn't erase what happened. No, she acknowledged, but maybe it's a beginning rather than an ending. She hugged me tightly. For what it's worth, I've always been proud to be your sister, even when I didn't show it well. After she left, I walked slowly back to my apartment through the familiar streets of Providence, the city that had sheltered my metamorphosis from rejected daughter to self-realized artist. The evening's events replayed in my mind, my parents' faces as they truly saw my work for the first time. Their belated recognition, their offer to eliminate the financial burden that had been my constant companion for 4 years. Their support, so desperately wanted once, now arrived when I had proven I could succeed without it. There was a certain poetry to the timing, a closing of a circle perhaps, rather than the validation I had once craved. I found myself neither jubilant nor resentful but contemplative, grateful for the journey that had forged me into someone stronger than approval-seeking ever could have. In my apartment, I opened my laptop and revisited the offer letter from Prismatic Dreams. The opportunity it presented felt like the next chapter in a story I was writing with increasingly confident strokes. I began composing my acceptance email, the decision crystallizing with clarity that would have been impossible without the crucible of the past 4 years. My phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Amanda Chen from the Lockhart Foundation. Your thesis work was exceptional. Available to discuss the grant opportunity tomorrow? Congratulations either way." I smiled, adding another item to my growing list of tomorrow's possibilities. The scared girl in her parents' kitchen, clutching a crumpled acceptance letter and a shattered dream, could never have imagined this moment. Standing at the threshold of opportunities she had created through sheer will and undeniable talent. The money had never been meant for someone like me, they had said. And they were right, though not in the way they intended. What I had needed wasn't financial support, but the fire of having something to prove, to them, to the world, and most importantly, to myself. That fire had tempered me, burning away insecurity and dependence, leaving behind something more valuable than any college fund could have provided: unshakable belief in my own vision. 2 weeks after graduation, I stood in my empty apartment, the last boxes sealed and labeled for shipping to Los Angeles. My walls, once covered with inspiration and works in progress, now showed only faint outlines where tape had held up 4 years of evolving creativity. The space felt smaller somehow, as if it had contracted in the absence of all that had filled it, not just physically, but emotionally and intellectually. A knock at the door revealed Ellie, arrived to help with my final departure preparations. "Ready for the big move?" she asked, surveying the stacked boxes. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, handing her a cup of coffee from the travel tray I'd picked up earlier, my kitchen supplies long packed away. She settled on the windowsill, the only remaining seat in the room. "I spoke with Mom and Dad yesterday. They've arranged for the loan payoff. It should be processed by the end of the week." I nodded, feeling a complex mix of gratitude and lingering resentment. Their financial intervention would give me unprecedented freedom as I started my new position, allowing me to focus on creative growth rather than economic survival for the first time in my adult life. Yet the timing of their support, coming only after external validation had proven my worth, remained a painful reminder of what our relationship had been. "They wanted to come today," Ellie continued, watching me carefully, "to help with the move. I told them you'd arranged everything professionally." "That's true," I confirmed. "The movers arrive in an hour, but it wasn't about logistics. I just needed this departure to be mine, on my terms." "I understand," she said simply. "So do they, I think. They're trying to respect your boundaries while showing they want to be part of your life again." I sipped my coffee, considering this. "I'm not shutting them out. I'm just proceeding cautiously. Trust takes longer to rebuild than to break." "Fair enough," Ellie acknowledged, though speaking as someone who's watched them these past months, I think they're genuinely transformed by recognizing what they almost lost. "Dad actually has your exhibition catalog on his desk at work. I caught him showing it to a colleague last week. The image was so incongruous with my lifelong experience of my father that I almost laughed. That's hard to imagine. A lot of things have changed," she said softly. Including me. I should have stood up for you more, Liv. From the beginning. I shook my head. You were 18, Ellie. Navigating your own relationship with them, your own future. I've never blamed you for their decisions. Still, she insisted, I benefited from their favoritism while watching you struggle. That sits with me differently, now than it did then. We fell silent for a moment, the morning sunlight catching dust motes swirling in the empty room, particles of 4 years accumulated life, now disturbed by the process of leaving. Will you call them? Ellie asked. Finally. When you get to LA? I considered the question honestly. Yes, I decided. Not because I need to, but because I choose to. There's a difference. She smiled, understanding the significance of the distinction. That's growth for all of you. The movers arrived precisely on schedule, efficiently loading my modest possessions into their truck. Ellie helped with the few items I would take in my car, my most essential art supplies, my portfolio, a small box of personal treasures accumulated during my time at RISD. As we closed the apartment door for the final time, I felt a momentary vertigo. The disorientation of ending one chapter before the next has fully materialized. You know what I keep thinking about? I said as we walked toward our parked cars. That morning in the kitchen, when they gave my college fund to you. It felt like the end of something then. I couldn't have imagined it was actually a beginning. The beginning of you becoming you, Ellie observed, without their expectations shaping your choices. Exactly. I unlocked my car, now packed for the cross-country journey. As painful as it was, I needed that moment to break free, to stop seeking their approval and start seeking my own truth. And look where it led you, she said, gesturing toward the car with its California maps and prismatic dreams, welcome package visible on the passenger seat. We embraced beside my packed car, the finality of the moment settling between us. This isn't goodbye, I assured her. Just see you later. Much. Later? She groaned dramatically. Do you have any idea how expensive flights to LA are on a medical resident's salary? I laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet street. You'll have a place to stay whenever you can make it work. As I prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced down to see my father's name on the screen. Your mother and I respect your need to make this transition independently. We'll be thinking of you every mile of your journey west. The house you grew up in will always have a place for you, but we're equally eager to visit the home you create for yourself in California. Drive safely. We love you. The message, supportive without being intrusive, acknowledging both past and future, represented a new equilibrium I was cautiously beginning to accept. I showed it to Ellie, who read it with a satisfied nod. See? Learning and growing, she said. Never thought I'd see the day. I texted back a simple, thank you, will check in from the road, before putting my phone away and embracing Ellie one final time. As I drove away from Providence, the city that had witnessed my transformation from rejected daughter to confident artist, I felt an overwhelming sense of completion. The painful catalyst that had launched my journey had ultimately led me to precisely where I needed to be, not defined by my parents' approval or disapproval, but by my own creative vision and hard-won self-belief. The road stretched before me, leading west toward new challenges and opportunities. In the rearview mirror, Providence gradually receded, not just a city I had lived in, but a state of being I had moved through. What lay ahead was no longer about proving my worth to others, but about continuing to create work that expressed my unique perspective on the world. The money had never been meant for someone like me, they had said that spring day long ago. And in the most unexpected way, it had been the greatest gift they could have given. Not financial support, but the liberation to discover my own strength, to forge my own path, and to recognize that true success comes not from external validation, but from uncompromising authenticity. As the highway opened up before me, I smiled at the symmetry of it all. Their rejection had not destroyed me, but distilled me, burning away everything that wasn't essentially mine, leaving behind the purest form of who I was meant to become. Now, 5 years later, I was driving toward a future of my own design, carrying with me not bitterness over what I had been denied, but gratitude for the fire that had forged me. The journey ahead would have its own challenges, its own moments of doubt and triumph, but I would face them on my own terms, with the confidence of someone who had already survived the worst rejection and emerged stronger for it. Whatever the road brought, I was ready, not because my parents finally believed in me, but because I had never stopped believing in myself. The California sun streamed through the windows of my new apartment in Silver Lake, casting golden patterns across the hardwood floors I'd fallen in love with during my initial viewing. 3 months had passed since I'd accepted the position at Prismatic Dreams and made the cross-country journey from Providence to Los Angeles. The space around me was gradually transforming from an empty shell into a home that reflected both who I was and who I was becoming. My drafting table, the one splurge I'd allowed myself with my first professional paycheck, stood positioned to capture the morning light. Beside it, floating shelves displayed art books, reference materials, and a growing collection of animation figurines gifted by my new colleagues. The living room walls showcased a carefully curated selection of my own work, alongside pieces traded with fellow RISD graduates and new artist friends from the studio. I sat at my small dining table, laptop open before me, reviewing the email I'd received that morning from the Lockhart Foundation. Their grant committee had approved my proposal for a series of illustrated narratives exploring intergenerational relationships and evolving family dynamics. The funding would allow me to pursue this personal project alongside my work at Prismatic Dreams, providing both financial support and structured mentorship from established artists in the field. My phone chimed with a FaceTime call from Ellie. I answered to find her looking exhausted but animated, her hospital ID badge still visible at the bottom of the frame. "Hey, art star," she greeted me, her voice slightly hoarse. "Just finished. A 36-hour shift and wanted to see your face before I crash." "You look terrible," I observed with the frank affection that had become our new normal. She laughed, pushing her hair back from her face. "Medical residency glamour. You should see the other doctors." She peered into the camera, examining my surroundings. "The apartment's looking more like you every time we talk." "It's getting there," I agreed, turning the phone to show her the latest additions. A vintage poster from a 1960s animation festival and a small cactus garden thriving on my balcony. "How are things at the hospital?" "Intense but incredible. I assisted on a pediatric surgery yesterday that..." She launched into a detailed account of a particularly challenging procedure, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten in her enthusiasm. I listened, genuinely interested in her work despite its distance from my own field. Our relationship had evolved significantly since the fracture in our family 4 years ago. Where we had once been polite strangers occupying the same household, we had gradually become authentic supporters of each other's distinct journeys. The shared experience of watching our parents reckon with their mistakes had created an unexpected bond between us. "Enough about blood and guts," she said finally. "Did you hear back about the grant?" "This morning, I got it." Her face lit up with genuine excitement. "Liv, that's incredible. Full funding?" "Full funding plus the mentorship program. I start next month, concurrent with my studio work. Mom and Dad are going to flip when they hear," she said, then caught herself. "Sorry. Have you told them yet?" "Not yet. I wanted to process it first." I hesitated, then added, "I'm planning to call them this weekend." Ellie nodded, understanding the significance. In the months since graduation, I had maintained cautious but consistent contact with our parents. Regular phone calls, occasional text updates, shared photos of my new life in California. They had respected my boundaries while demonstrating continued interest in my career and well-being. The wounds hadn't fully healed, but they were no longer raw and bleeding. "They're making an effort," Ellie observed. "Dad actually visited the RISD website last week to look at their alumni features. He mentioned hoping to see your work showcased there someday." The image of my father, who had once dismissed art school as a waste of resources, voluntarily exploring the RISD website struck me as surreal but touching. "That's progress," I acknowledged. "Speaking of progress," Ellie continued, "they've been asking about visiting you. Not pushing, just wondering if you might be open to it sometime this fall." I considered the prospect of hosting my parents and the life I had built without them. 6 months ago, the idea would have felt intrusive, even threatening. Now it merely felt complicated. "I think I could handle that," I said finally. "Maybe around Thanksgiving? The studio shuts down for 4 days, and I'll have time to actually show them around." Ellie's expression brightened despite her exhaustion. "I'll let them know that might be an option. No pressure either way." After we ended our call, I moved to my balcony with a cup of tea, gazing out at the hills that cradled the eastern edge of Los Angeles. The city sprawled before me, a vast, complex ecosystem of ambition, creativity, and relentless reinvention. I had found my place within it more quickly than I had dared to hope, welcomed by the vibrant community of artists and designers who populated the animation industry. My transition to Prismatic Dreams had been remarkably smooth. My portfolio and RISD credentials had opened the door, but it was my particular artistic perspective that had secured my position on the visual development team. During my first week, the creative director had pointed to a specific series from my thesis exhibition, "The Metaphorical Journey of Breaking Free from Confinement," as exactly the fresh viewpoint they had been seeking for their upcoming original feature. "There's something authentic about how you depict transformation," he had said during my orientation. "A rawness that feels earned rather than imagined. That's the kind of visual truth we need for this project." His words had resonated deeply, acknowledging not just my technical skill, but the life experience that informed my creative vision. The painful catalyst that had launched my journey, my parents' rejection of my artistic path, had ultimately become my greatest professional asset. The very struggle they had imposed had distinguished my work from peers who had followed more traditional, supported trajectories. Now, 3 months into my role, I had been elevated to lead concept artist for a key sequence in the film, a dreamlike visualization of the protagonist's internal evolution. The assignment represented exceptional trust in a junior team member, a fact noted with approval by my more experienced colleagues. The department head had specifically cited my unique ability to render emotional states with visual precision when announcing the assignment. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, a fellow concept artist who had become both colleague and friend since my arrival. "Studio happy hour at Rosewood tonight. Team celebrating green light on the forest sequence. You coming?" I smiled, typing back a confirmation. The easy camaraderie of the studio environment had been an unexpected benefit of my position. A creative community that understood and valued the language of visual storytelling that had once made me an outlier in my family's achievement-oriented world. Before setting my phone down, I scrolled briefly through recent messages from my parents. My mother's texts had evolved from cautious inquiries about practical matters to genuine questions about my creative process and studio experience. My father, less comfortable with casual technology, sent fewer but more substantive messages. Links to articles about animation innovations, questions about industry developments, occasional observations that suggested he was actively educating himself about my field. Their most recent message had arrived yesterday, a photograph of the living room wall in their home, where one of my earlier paintings, a piece I had created during high school and left behind when I departed for RSD, now hung in a proper frame, prominently displayed where one of my father's legal commendations had previously resided. The accompanying text read simply, "We should have done this years ago. It brings life to the room." The gesture, understated yet unmistakable in its symbolism, had affected me more deeply than I had anticipated. My work, once relegated to Zita, my bedroom and eventually abandoned in their home, had been not only preserved but elevated to a position of honor. The implicit acknowledgement of their failure to recognize its value mirrored our evolving relationship. Imperfect, but gradually finding a new equilibrium. As I prepared for the studio gathering that evening, selecting a casual outfit that balanced professionalism with creative industry norms, I found myself reflecting on the circuitous path that had led me to this moment. The devastation I had felt in my parents' kitchen 4 years ago, watching my college fund transferred to my sister while my own dreams were dismissed, had seemed like the end of possibility. Instead, it had become the beginning of self-reliance, the catalyst for growth that had shaped not only my career, but my fundamental sense of self. The evening at Rosewood flowed with the easy rhythm of creative professionals, unwinding after intense workdays. Gathered around tables in the bar's outdoor patio, my colleagues traded industry gossip, debated aesthetic approaches to challenging sequences, and celebrated recent breakthroughs with the animated enthusiasm particular to artists who spend their days translating imagination into visual reality. Marcus slid into the seat beside me, passing me a craft beer from the local brewery I'd mentioned liking. "Green light officially confirmed," he announced, clinking his glass against mine. "Your concept boards for the transition sequence were specifically mentioned in the executive review." "Seriously?" I hadn't expected my work to have reached that level of visibility so quickly. He nodded, clearly pleased to deliver the news. "Renata said your visual metaphors for the character's internal journey were exactly the fresh perspective they'd been hoping for when they brought in new talent this year. The validation, from studio executives who evaluated projects based on creative merit and commercial potential rather than personal connection, reinforced what I had gradually come to accept. My artistic voice was valuable not despite, but because of the unique path I had traveled. Later that evening, as conversations around me shifted from work to more personal territories, Sophia, one of the senior background artists, turned to me with curious interest. "You mentioned you went to RISD, right? Did your parents flip when you decided to pursue art? Mine practically disowned me when I chose CalArts over law school." The question, casual yet unexpectedly aligned with my experience, caught me off guard. I took a sip of my beer, considering how to respond. The studio environment encouraged authenticity, and I had gradually learned that many of my colleagues had navigated similar family tensions around their creative pursuits. "They more than flipped," I admitted finally. "They actually gave my college fund to my sister when I got into RISD, said art school wasn't a real education and refused to support it." Sophia's eyebrows shot up. "Damn, that's cold. How did you manage?" "Scholarships, loans, multiple jobs. It wasn't easy, but it forced me to take my work seriously from day one. No room for artistic indulgence when you're paying for every credit. Hour yourself." Marcus leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "And now? Have they come around since you landed at one of the top studios right out of school?" I smiled, appreciating his framing of my accomplishment. "They're evolving. It's complicated, but there's movement. They paid off my student loans after graduation, a belated acknowledgement that maybe my education was worthwhile after all." "Financial guilt offerings," Sophia nodded knowingly. "Classic parental realization tactic." "It's more than that," I found myself saying, surprising myself, with the defense. "They're genuinely trying to understand a world they initially dismissed. My father apparently visits the RISD website now, according to my sister." "Redemption arc," Marcus commented with the narrative sensibility of a born storyteller. The I Question is whether you're writing them as complex antagonists or potential allies in your second act. His framing, viewing my family situation through the lens of narrative structure, struck me as both insightful and unexpectedly helpful. Somewhere in between, I think, supporting characters with their own growth trajectory that occasionally intersects with the protagonist's journey. The table erupted in appreciative laughter, the tension of my revelation diffusing into professional camaraderie. For the remainder of the evening, colleagues shared their own stories of family friction around creative careers, tales of disapproving parents who had eventually attended gallery openings with awkward pride, of relatives who had transitioned from asking when they would get real jobs to requesting free design work once their talents were professionally recognized. The shared experiences created an unexpected sense of community, the recognition that many creative paths involved similar struggles for legitimacy and understanding. My story, while particular in its details, followed patterns familiar to others, who had chosen to prioritize artistic authenticity over conventional security. When I returned to my apartment that night, I felt a subtle shift in my perspective on my family situation. The framing of our estrangement and tentative reconciliation as a narrative arc, complete with character development and potential resolution, offered a constructive distance that allowed me to view our relationship with greater objectivity. On impulse, I opened my laptop and navigated to the Lockhart Foundation portal, reviewing the project proposal that had secured their grant. My concept, a series of illustrated narratives exploring the evolution of family relationships across generations, had emerged from my own experience, but transcended personal catharsis to address universal themes of belonging, recognition, and the complex dance between independence and connection. In the project description, I had written, "Family relationships are often viewed as static entities, fixed constellations of roles and expectations. This series explores the more complex reality that these connections are dynamic systems capable of rupture, evolution, and unexpected regeneration. Through visual storytelling, I intend to capture moments of both dissolution and reconciliation, examining how identity forms both within and in resistance to family structures." Reading the words now, I recognized that my creative vision had evolved alongside my personal journey. The hurt and anger that had initially fueled my determination had gradually transformed into something more nuanced, a perspective that acknowledged complexity without diminishing authentic emotional experience. The next morning, my alarm chimed at 6, early even by my disciplined standards. I had requested the first 2 hours of my workday be assigned to independent development rather than collaborative sessions, allowing me focused time to refine concepts for the dream sequence before the full team convened. At the studio, I settled. At my workstation with a large coffee, reviewing my initial sketches and digital renderings for the pivotal transformation moment. The protagonist, a young woman discovering her inherent magical abilities, experienced a sequence where her perception of reality fundamentally shifted, revealing a world of previously invisible possibilities. As I worked, adding layers of visual metaphor to the sequence, I found my thoughts returning to the conversation from the previous evening. Marcus's framing of my family situation as a narrative with potential for resolution had lingered, offering a perspective that felt simultaneously detached and deeply personal. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Dad and I would love to visit around Thanksgiving if the invitation stands. No pressure. We understand if timing doesn't work with your new job. Either way, we're proud of all you're accomplishing." The message, supportive without being intrusive, acknowledging my autonomy while expressing connection, represented a significant evolution from the dismissive parents who had once rejected my chosen path. The transformation wasn't complete or perfect, but it was authentic, mirroring my own growth from wounded daughter to self-actualized professional. I texted back, "Thanksgiving timing works. Would be good to show you my world here. Looking forward to it." As I set my phone aside and returned to my concept art, I realized I was approaching both my creative work and my family relationship with a similar perspective, seeing each as evolutionary processes rather than fixed outcomes. The character in my drawings discovered her powers gradually through both struggle and revelation. My parents were similarly discovering new ways of seeing both my work and their role in my life. Later that day, during the team review session, the creative director paused at my rendering of the protagonist's moment of fundamental perception shift. "This is exactly right," he said, examining the layered visual elements that conveyed both disorientation and awakening. "You've captured that precise moment when everything someone thought they understood suddenly reveals itself as just one limited perspective among many possibilities." His observation, focused on my artistic execution rather than its personal underpinnings, nevertheless resonated with my broader life experience. My own journey had been exactly that. A gradual revelation that what had once seemed like catastrophic rejection had actually been a catalyst for discovering strengths and possibilities I might never have found on a more conventional, supported path. That evening, I called my parents rather than simply responding to their text. My father answered, his voice registering surprise at the direct contact. "Olivia, hello. Everything all right?" "Everything's good," I assured him. I wanted to confirm that Thanksgiving would work for a visit. "My schedule at the studio is clear from Thursday through Sunday that weekend." "That would be wonderful," he said, his tone warming. "Your mother and I have been hoping for an opportunity to see your new life there, and your work at the studio, if that's possible." "Parts of it are confidential until release," I explained. "But I could show you the general process and some of the approved concept art. And I received news yesterday that might interest you both." "Oh?" His attention sharpened, reminding me of how he approached new information in his legal practice, analytical but engaged. "I've been awarded a grant from the Lockhart Foundation for an independent illustration project, full funding for a series exploring family dynamics and evolving relationships across generations." The silence that followed wasn't dismissive but absorptive. I could almost visualize him processing this information, integrating it into his gradually expanding understanding of my professional world. "Olivia, that's extraordinary," he said. Finally, his voice containing a depth of pride I had once despaired of ever hearing. "A competitive grant for independent work while maintaining your studio position. That's significant professional recognition." "It is," I agreed, allowing myself to fully own the accomplishment. "The foundation selects only 5 emerging artists annually for this particular program. Your mother will want to hear this directly. Can you hold a moment?" I heard him calling for her, then muffled conversation as he apparently briefed her on my news before she came to the phone. "Olivia?" My mother's voice carried a warmth that had been absent during my college years. "Dad says you've received a prestigious grant. Tell me everything." As I explained the Lockhart Foundation program and my project concept, I was struck by the quality of her attention, focused and genuine in a way that acknowledged both the professional significance of the opportunity and its alignment with my personal artistic vision. "The subject matter sounds fascinating," she observed when I had finished, "and perhaps not unrelated to your own experience." Her perception, recognizing the connection between my creative work and personal journey without reducing one to the other, demonstrated an evolution in how she engaged with my artistic identity. "There are elements of personal experience in it," I acknowledged, "but transformed into something more universal. That's how art works. It distills individual truth into something others can connect with." "I'm beginning to understand that," she said quietly, "through watching your journey." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, the longest we had spoken since before my departure for RISD 4 years earlier. They asked thoughtful questions about my project timeline, my experience at Prismatic Dreams, and my adjustment to life in Los Angeles. I found myself sharing details I would have once withheld, describing the creative community I had found at the studio, and the visual inspiration I drew from California's distinctive light and landscape. As we prepared to end the call, my father cleared his throat, his characteristic signal before addressing significant matters. "Olivia, before you go, there's something I think we need to say directly." My mother's voice joined his, suggesting they had discussed this in advance. "We've tried to show through our actions these past months that we're genuinely sorry for how we handled your college decision. But we've never actually said the words explicitly, which we should have done long ago." "We were wrong," my father stated simply. "Wrong in our assessment of your artistic potential, wrong in our dismissal of your chosen path, and wrong in the decision to withhold financial support from your education. More than that," my mother added, "we damaged our relationship with you through that decision. The fact that you've succeeded despite our failure to support you speaks to your determination and talent, not to any wisdom on our part." The explicit acknowledgement, direct and unqualified, touched something in me that incremental gestures had not fully reached. It was not that I had been consciously awaiting an apology, but hearing the words articulated with such clarity created space for a more complete reconciliation than I had believed possible. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, my voice steady, despite the emotion behind it. "It means a lot to hear it directly." "We're profoundly proud of who you've become," my father continued. "Not just professionally, though your accomplishments are remarkable by any standard. We're proud of the integrity with which you've pursued your vision, even when, especially when, we failed to support it." The conversation concluded shortly after, with confirmed plans for their Thanksgiving visit and promises of regular updates about my grant project as it developed. As I ended the call, I felt a sense of closure that had previously eluded me, not because the past had been erased, but because it had been honestly acknowledged, creating foundation for a different kind of future relationship. The following week brought immersion in both my studio responsibilities and preliminary planning for my Lockhart Foundation project. The Grant Foundation assigned me a mentor, renowned illustrator Josephine Krieger, whose narrative artwork had revolutionized visual storytelling and publication design during the previous decade. Our initial video consultation established immediate rapport, her incisive questions pushing me to articulate the conceptual framework of my project with greater precision. "You're exploring family dynamics," she observed, "but specifically the process of recognition, both its absence and its eventual emergence. That's rich territory, particularly given your interest in visual metaphor." "It's the space between rupture and reconciliation that interests me most," I explained. "How identity forms in that gap, and how reconnection happens, or doesn't, once both parties have evolved separately." She nodded, making notes. "Send me your preliminary sketches next week. I'm particularly interested in how you'll visually distinguish between the character's perception of familial rejection and the actual motivations of the family members. That perceptual gap is where the most interesting narrative tension resides." Her framing of the project's central challenge resonated with my own experience. The distance between how I had perceived my parents' rejection of my artistic path and their gradually revealed perspective. What I had experienced as categorical dismissal of my value had been, in their minds, misguided protection from what they perceived as a precarious future. That evening, as I sketched initial concepts for the grant project, I found myself working with visual metaphors that captured this perceptual gap. Split-screen illustrations showing parallel realities, shadow elements revealing hidden motivations, beneath surface actions, color palettes that shifted depending on whose perspective dominated the frame. My phone chimed with a text from Ellie. "Just confirmed time off for Thanksgiving. Can I crash at your place too? Promise not to interfere. With the Great Parental Reconciliation Tour, but want to see your LA life." I smiled, texting back immediate confirmation. Her presence would provide both welcome support and natural buffering during my parents' visit, another example of how our relationship had evolved from distant siblings to genuine allies. As I returned to my sketches, I realized I was approaching both my creative work and my family reconciliation from a position of authentic strength rather than defensive vulnerability. The transformation that had begun in my parents' kitchen 4 years ago, when they had redirected my college fund to my sister and dismissed my artistic ambitions, had come full circle. The money had never been meant for someone like me, they had said, and they had been right, though not in the way they intended. What I had needed wasn't financial support, but the catalyst to forge my own path, discover my resilient core, and develop the distinctive artistic voice that now defined both my professional success and personal identity. In denying me the easy path, they had unwittingly directed me toward the transformative one, a journey that had shaped not only my career, but my fundamental understanding of success, validation, and authentic self-worth. The grant project I was now beginning would translate that personal truth into universal visual narrative, completing the alchemical process by which individual struggle transmutes into artistic insight. As California twilight softened the light, in my apartment, I stood at my drafting table surveying the emerging visual concepts for my project. The protagonist of my illustrated narrative, a young woman discovering her capacity to transform limitation into possibility, gazed back at me from multiple sketches, her evolution from confined daughter to self-actualized creator captured in sequential images. The character wasn't precisely me, just as the narrative wasn't exactly my story, but the emotional truth at its core pulsed with authentic lived experience. My phone screen lit up with a notification from my studio's creative director. Executive review loved your concept boards. Green light for your vision on the transformation sequence. This is why we brought you onto the team. I smiled, setting the phone aside and returning to my drawing with renewed focus. 5 years ago, in a sunlit kitchen that now seemed to belong to another lifetime, my parents had made a decision that they had believed would curtail my impractical dreams. Instead, they had inadvertently launched me toward a future more vibrant and authentic than any of us could have imagined. One where the very struggle they had imposed had become the foundation of both professional success and personal fulfillment. The money had never been meant for someone like me, but the life I had created without it was uniquely, powerfully mine. Crafted through determination, talent, and the uncompromising belief in a vision that had proven more valuable than any college fund could ever have been. The week of Thanksgiving arrived with the peculiar Los Angeles version of autumn, palm trees standing unchanged against marginally cooler temperatures, while store displays featured incongruous images of fall, foliage and snow. I had spent the preceding days preparing my apartment for visitors, creating a guest bedroom out of my home office and stocking the kitchen with groceries for the upcoming family gathering. My parents would arrive this afternoon, with Ellie flying in tomorrow morning. The timing had been carefully orchestrated, allowing me an initial evening alone with my parents before my sister joined us as both buffer and bridge. I had suggested the arrangement deliberately, recognizing that the most challenging conversations should happen early, creating space for more relaxed interaction during the actual holiday. At precisely 3:45 p.m., my phone chimed with a text from my father. Just landed at LAX, collecting luggage now. Rental car reserved. GPS says approximately 40 minutes to your address, traffic permitting. The formal precision of his message, so characteristic of his communication style, made me smile. Some things remained unchanged, even as our relationship evolved. I texted back a simple confirmation and returned to my final preparations. Standing in my living room, I surveyed the space critically. The apartment reflected my aesthetic sensibilities and professional identity in every detail, from the carefully arranged art books on my coffee table to the framed illustrations on my walls. This was not the bedroom of a teenager seeking parental approval, but the home of a successful professional who had created her life according to her own vision. The distinction felt important as I prepared to welcome my parents into this space. For the first time, they would be visitors in my world rather than me returning to theirs. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted, not through confrontation but through the natural evolution of having built a life that stood firmly on its own foundation. At 4:32 p.m., another text arrived. "Parking now, Building 3, correct?" I stepped onto my small balcony and spotted them immediately, my father navigating while my mother scanned the apartment complex, both looking slightly out of place in their East Coast attire. My father's posture remained military straight, his movements precise and deliberate. My mother walked beside him, her gaze taking in the surroundings with curious attention, her hand occasionally touching his arm to direct his notice toward architectural details or landscaping elements. Seeing them from this distance, physically, small within the landscape of my new city, offered a strange perspective shift. These two people, who had once seemed to possess absolute authority over my future, now appeared as simply what they were: middle-aged professionals visiting their daughter in a city unfamiliar to them. I called down from the balcony, waving to catch their attention. My mother spotted me first, her face breaking into a genuine smile as she waved back with uncharacteristic animation. My father looked up more slowly, shading his eyes against the late afternoon sun, his expression transitioning from concentration to recognition. Minutes later, a knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find them standing side by side, travel bags at their feet, both wearing expressions that mingled excitement with evident nervousness. "Olivia," my mother said, stepping forward to embrace me with careful affection. "It's wonderful to see you." My father followed with a more hesitant hug, his usual formality softened by genuine emotion. "Your home is in a beautiful location," he observed, defaulting to practical assessment in the face of emotional complexity. "Come in," I said, standing aside to welcome them into my apartment. "Let me show you around." They entered with the careful attention of people visiting a museum, observing details, noting arrangements, absorbing the physical manifestation of the life I had created 3,000 miles from where they had once expected me to remain. "Your work," my mother said softly, pausing before a framed illustration from my thesis exhibition, the image of a woman gathering fragments of shattered glass to construct wings. "It's even more powerful in this setting." "That's from the series that helped me secure the position at Prismatic," I explained, watching as she studied the intricate details with newfound appreciation. My father moved toward my drafting table, where concept sketches for my grant project were carefully arranged in sequential order. "These are new," he observed. "Part of the Lockhart Foundation work you mentioned." I nodded, joining him beside the table. "Initial concepts for the narrative sequence. They're still evolving." He leaned closer, examining the technical execution, with the same analytical attention he brought to legal briefs. "The level of detail is extraordinary," he said after a moment. "And there's a structural cohesion to the visual progression that reminds me of carefully constructed legal arguments, each element building upon the previous while setting foundation for what follows." The comparison, drawing parallels between my artistic process and his legal expertise, represented a significant evolution in how he engaged with my work. Rather than dismissing it as fundamentally different from real professional endeavors, he now sought similarities, points of connection within his own framework of understanding. "That's insightful," I acknowledged. Narrative illustration does require that kind of structured progression. Each image needs to stand independently while contributing to the overall story arc. My mother joined us, her attention moving between the sketches and framed pieces on my walls. "Your apartment is a perfect reflection of you," she said. "Creative, but organized, distinctive, but welcoming." You've created a beautiful home here. The genuine admiration in her voice, free from the qualifying comparisons that had characterized her previous assessments of my choices, touched something in me that I had protected carefully since our estrangement. This wasn't the grudging acknowledgement of someone cornered into recognition, but the authentic appreciation of someone seeing with new eyes. "Thank you," I said simply. "Would you like something to drink? I thought we could relax for a bit before dinner. I have reservations at a restaurant nearby at 7. As we settled in my living room with glasses of wine, the initial formality gradually softened into more natural conversation. My parents asked questions about my neighborhood, my adjustment to Los Angeles culture, and my daily routine at the studio. I found myself sharing details I would have once withheld, describing the creative challenges of particular animation sequences, the collaborative dynamics of the studio environment, the friendships that had begun forming with colleagues who shared my passion for visual storytelling. My father, ever practical, inquired about my financial situation, not with the judgmental concern of previous years, but with genuine interest in my professional stability. When I explained the compensation structure at Prismatic Dreams and the additional support from the Lockhart grant, his expression registered both surprise and approval. "That's considerably more than most recent graduates in any field," he observed. "Particularly impressive given the competitive nature of creative industries." "The studio values innovation," I explained. "They're willing to invest in artists who bring distinctive perspectives to their projects. And they recognize that quality in your work immediately," my mother added, her pride evident. "That speaks volumes about both your talent and their discernment." As the conversation continued, I felt a gradual unwinding of tension I hadn't fully acknowledged was still present, the residual wariness that had become habitual during our interactions over the past 4 years. In its place emerged something more complex. Not the simple trust of my pre-college years, but a mature engagement between adults with shared history and evolving understanding. At the restaurant later that evening, a small farm-to-table establishment that showcased California's seasonal produce, the conversation shifted toward more substantive territory. My father, halfway through his entree, set down his fork with deliberate care, his characteristic gesture before addressing significant matters. "Olivia," he began, his voice measured but sincere, "your mother and I have been reflecting extensively on our actions 4 years ago, particularly our decision regarding your college funding." My mother nodded, her expression solemn. "We've come to understand how profoundly we misjudged both your commitment to your artistic path and its professional viability. More fundamentally," my father continued, "we failed to recognize that our role should have been to support your authentic aspirations rather than impose our limited understanding of success." I took a sip of water, giving myself a moment to process their words. The explicit acknowledgement, delivered not in the emotional aftermath of my thesis exhibition, but in the calm context of a dinner months later, carried particular weight. "I appreciate hearing that," I said finally. "Though I've come to realize something that might sound strange, in some ways, your decision forced me to develop strengths I might not have discovered otherwise." They exchanged glances, clearly surprised by this perspective. Working multiple jobs while completing one of the most demanding programs at RISD taught me discipline and time management that set me apart from peers who had more comfortable paths, I explained. And knowing I was entirely responsible for my own success eliminated any temptation to coast or take opportunities for granted. "That may be true," my father acknowledged carefully, "but it doesn't justify our failure. The fact that you forge strength from adversity speaks to your character, not to the wisdom of our actions." "We should have believed in you," my mother added simply, "even if we didn't fully understand your path." The directness of their acknowledgement, without qualification or defensiveness, created space for genuine reconciliation that tentative. gestures had not fully achieved. This wasn't just recognition of my professional success, but deeper acknowledgement of their fundamental misconception about my capabilities and determination. I've been thinking about this a lot while developing my grant project, I said after a moment, about how families struggle to recognize emerging identities that don't match their expectations, and how that recognition, when it finally comes, creates possibility for new kinds of connection. That's the theme of your illustration series? My father asked, his interest clearly piqued. I nodded. The narrative follows several generations within a family, exploring how limiting expectations create distance, while recognition of authentic identity enables meaningful relationship. It's not explicitly autobiographical, but it certainly draws on personal experience. I'd like to understand more about your creative process, my mother said, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. How you translate these abstract concepts into visual narratives. The conversation that followed represented perhaps the most substantive engagement they had ever shown with my artistic process, asking thoughtful questions about my visual metaphors, my technical approaches, and the conceptual framework underlying my illustrations. I found myself explaining aspects of my work that I typically shared only with fellow artists, surprised by their attentive engagement and perceptive observations. By the time we returned to my apartment, something had shifted subtly but significantly in our interaction. The careful navigation of emotional terrain had given way to more natural exchange, still mindful of our history but less constrained by it. As I prepared the guest room for them, arranging fresh towels and water glasses on the bedside table, my mother appeared in the doorway. "Olivia," she said quietly, "there's something else I wanted to say privately." I turned to face her, waiting. "I've been thinking about that day in the kitchen, when we told you the college fund would go to Ellie's education instead of yours." Her voice remained steady, though her eyes reflected deep emotion. What haunts me most isn't just the decision itself, but how we delivered it. With such dismissive certainty, such complete failure to recognize what your art meant to you. She stepped further into the room, her composure wavering slightly. "I remember the look on your face when I reduced years of your passionate work to drawing pictures. The hurt in your eyes in that moment, I see it clearly now, though I was blind to it then." The memory she referenced, that specific dismissal amid the larger rejection, had indeed cut particularly deep, though I hadn't realized she had registered my reaction. That phrase reflected my profound ignorance. She continued, "Both about art as a discipline and about who you were becoming. I'm deeply sorry for how carelessly I diminished something so central to your identity." The specificity of her apology, addressing not just the financial decision, but the attitude it represented, touched something I had protected carefully over the years. This wasn't generic remorse, but precise recognition of a painful moment that had crystallized our fundamental misalignment. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, my voice steadier than I had expected. That particular moment did stay with me, not just the words themselves, but the certainty behind them. As if my perspective couldn't possibly have validity against yours, she nodded, accepting this truth without defensiveness. It was profound arrogance on my part, assuming I understood your capabilities and possibilities better than you did. The irony is that you understood yourself far more clearly at 17 than I understood either you or myself at twice that age. The insight, reflecting not just acknowledgement of her mistake but deeper recognition of my self-awareness, suggested genuine evolution in how she perceived our relationship and respective positions within it. "I think we're finding better balance now," I offered, "between your life experience and my self-knowledge. It's not that either perspective is completely right or wrong, just that both deserve genuine consideration." She smiled, visibly relieved by this framing. That's a generous way to view it, and precisely the mature perspective I should have demonstrated 4 years ago. The following morning, I woke early to prepare breakfast before driving to the airport to collect Ellie. My parents joined me in the kitchen, falling into the comfortable rhythm of shared meal preparation that had characterized our household during less complicated times. My father prepared coffee with methodical precision, while my mother assisted with slicing fruit and setting the table. "I'd like to see your studio while we're here," my father said as we ate. "If that's permitted, of course. I understand the proprietary nature of creative development in competitive industries." "I've arranged a brief tour for tomorrow," I confirmed. "Nothing confidential, but you'll get to see the general environment and meet some of my colleagues." "I've been reading about animation production processes," he added, surprising me with this revelation. "Fascinating integration of artistic and technical elements. The structured workflow reminds me somewhat of how law firms organize complex cases, specialized roles collaborating toward cohesive outcomes." His effort to understand my professional world on its own terms, researching independently rather than dismissing what seemed foreign, represented significant growth in how he engaged with my career path. "There are probably more parallels than either of us initially recognized," I acknowledged. "Different applications of structured thinking and creative problem-solving." My mother smiled, watching our exchange with evident satisfaction. "Perhaps creative and analytical thinking aren't as oppositional as we once assumed," she observed. "Just different expressions of the same fundamental human capacity for making meaning." Her philosophical framing, acknowledging artificial divisions in how we had categorized intellectual approaches, suggested deeper reconsideration of assumptions that had contributed to our estrangement. Later that morning, as we drove to collect Ellie from the airport, my father unexpectedly returned to our conversation from the previous evening. "Your grant project, exploring recognition and reconciliation within families, has been on my mind," he said, his gaze fixed on the traffic ahead. "It occurs to me that what you're creating isn't just art in the conventional sense, but a form of visual philosophy. You're using illustration to explore fundamental questions about identity and relationship that most people never articulate, let alone examine critically." The observation, recognizing the intellectual substance beneath the aesthetic surface of my work, represented perhaps the most significant evolution in how he engaged with my creative path. This wasn't merely acknowledging commercial viability or technical skill, but the substantive contribution of artistic perspective to meaningful discourse. "That's exactly what I'm attempting," I confirmed, genuinely touched by his insight. "Using visual metaphor to explore emotional and relational dynamics that resist verbal articulation. I'm beginning to understand why traditional metrics failed so completely to capture the value of your work," he continued thoughtfully. "We were applying entirely inadequate frameworks, like trying to measure temperature with a ruler." The analogy, precise and illuminating, demonstrated both his analytical mind and his growing capacity to recognize the limitations of his previous perspective. My father rarely acknowledged being wrong. His ability to do so now, with such clarity, reflected genuine transformation. At the airport, Ellie emerged from the arrival gate looking exhausted but animated, her face breaking into a wide smile as she spotted us in the waiting area. She embraced me first, then our parents, her easy affection creating immediate warmth. "The gang's all here," she announced with characteristic enthusiasm. "Family reunion, California style. Please tell me there's good coffee involved. Hospital. Coffee should be classified as a controlled substance for how it destroys your insides." Her arrival shifted the family dynamic immediately, her natural exuberance and comfort with emotional expression creating space for lighter interaction. As we drove back to my apartment, she regaled us with medical residency stories, asking questions about my studio work and our parents' first impressions of Los Angeles with equal interest. Back at my apartment, after Ellie had showered and changed, we gathered on my small balcony with lunch I had prepared earlier. The November sunshine created perfect conditions for outdoor dining, warm without being uncomfortable, the sky impossibly blue above the palm trees lining my street. "So," Ellie said, helping herself to salad, "has everyone been on good behavior? Any dramatic confrontations I missed?" "Actually," I replied, exchanging glances with our parents, "it's been surprisingly undramatic. Substantive, but constructive. We've been having conversations we should have had years ago," my father acknowledged, "recognizing mistakes we made and working toward better understanding." Ellie's eyebrows rose slightly. "Well, that's refreshingly direct. I was expecting at least a day of careful small talk before anyone addressed the elephant in the room." "We decided that approach would waste valuable time," my mother explained. "Olivia has created a remarkable life here. We want to understand it authentically rather than just observe its surface." "Speaking of remarkable," Ellie said, turning to me, "Mom mentioned you're giving them a studio tour tomorrow. Any chance I could tag along? I've been dying to see the famous prismatic dreams in action since you got the job." "Already arranged," I assured her. "The tour includes all of you. Plus, I thought we might visit the Lockhart Foundation afterward. They're hosting a gallery exhibition of past grant recipients' work that could give you all a better sense of my upcoming project." The day unfolded with a comfortable rhythm, conversation flowing naturally between professional updates, family, stories, and plans for the coming days. After lunch, I took them for a walking tour of my neighborhood, showing favorite local spots and explaining how this particular area of Los Angeles had become a hub for creative professionals across multiple industries. By evening, as we prepared dinner together in my kitchen, the initial formality had given way entirely to more natural interaction. My father asked questions about my animation techniques with genuine curiosity. My mother and Ellie discussed potential connections between my visual metaphors and psychological concepts they both found interesting. I found myself explaining aspects of my creative process I'd never expected them to engage with, the specific ways I translated emotional states into visual elements, the technical approaches that distinguished my illustrative style. As we sat, down to our improvised pre-Thanksgiving dinner, I was struck by how fundamentally the dynamic had shifted. This wasn't the forced politeness of people navigating broken relationship, nor was it the automatic intimacy of our pre-estrangement interaction. Instead, it represented something new and potentially more substantive, the careful construction of authentic connection between adults with shared history but evolved identities. The following morning, we arrived at Prismatic Dreams for the arranged tour. As we entered the studio complex, I watched my family's reactions with quiet satisfaction. The creative energy of the environment was immediately palpable. Open workspaces filled with artists and designers collaborating on various aspects of ongoing projects, walls covered with concept art and storyboards, the general atmosphere balancing professional focus with creative playfulness. Marcus, who had arranged the tour as a personal favor, greeted us in the lobby. "Welcome to the Dream Factory," he said with characteristic enthusiasm. "Olivia has become an essential part of our visual development team in record time. We're going to show you why we consider ourselves lucky to have recruited her." As he led us through various departments, explaining the animation production process and highlighting specific projects in development, I observed my parents' reactions with interest. My father asked thoughtful questions about technical aspects and production timelines. My mother noted parallels between character design processes and psychological development theories. Ellie simply absorbed everything with evident fascination, occasionally squeezing my arm in excited recognition when spotting elements from films she had enjoyed. When we reached the visual development department where I worked, Marcus paused beside a large display featuring concept art from the upcoming feature. "This section right here," he said, indicating a series of illustrations showing the protagonist's transformation sequence, "is Olivia's work. She's leading the visual development for this pivotal sequence, quite remarkable for someone who joined the studio just months ago." My parents studied the displayed artwork with careful attention, their expressions reflecting genuine appreciation rather than polite interest. The technical execution is extraordinary, my father observed, examining the detailed rendering of environmental elements. But it's the emotional impact that's truly striking, how the character's internal state manifests in the surrounding visual elements. That's precisely what distinguished Olivia's portfolio during recruitment, Marcus confirmed. Many artists have technical skill, but far fewer can create this kind of emotional resonance through visual composition. It's a rare quality that can't really be taught. You either have that intuitive understanding, or you don't. My mother turned to me, her expression thoughtful. This connects directly to your thesis work, doesn't it? The exploration of internal transformation through visual metaphor? Yes, I acknowledged, somewhat surprised by her perception of the continuity. Different application, but similar conceptual approach. You've been developing this visual language for years, she observed, well before we recognized its significance. The acknowledgement, recognizing the coherent evolution of my artistic voice, rather than seeing my current success as isolated achievement, suggested deeper understanding of my creative development than I had anticipated. After completing the studio tour, we visited the Lockhart Foundation Gallery as planned. The exhibition showcased work from previous grant recipients, providing context for the program I would be participating in during the coming year. As we moved through the gallery spaces, examining diverse approaches to visual storytelling, the conversation naturally expanded to include broader questions about art's function in contemporary society. What strikes me, my father observed as we studied a particularly powerful narrative sequence, is how these works address complex social and psychological issues that often resist verbal articulation. They create accessible entry points to difficult conversations. That's a central aspect of why I was drawn to illustration, I explained. Visual metaphor can bypass intellectual defenses that might otherwise prevent engagement with uncomfortable truths. Like family dynamics, my mother suggested quietly. Exactly, I confirmed. My grant project specifically explores how visual narrative can illuminate patterns of recognition and misrecognition within families, how we see or fail to see each other across generational and experiential divides. Which we've lived rather dramatically, Ellie added, glancing between our parents and me. And are now attempting to understand more consciously, my father acknowledged. Perhaps your work will help other families navigate similar terrain with greater awareness than we managed. The framing, recognizing the broader social value of creative work addressing relational dynamics, represented significant evolution in how he conceptualized the purpose and impact of artistic expression. That evening, as we prepared for our Thanksgiving dinner the following day, the conversation turned toward future plans. Seated around my living room with glasses of wine, we discussed possibilities that would have seemed implausible months earlier. We've been thinking about visiting more regularly, my mother said carefully. Perhaps quarterly, if that wouldn't feel intrusive. We want to understand your life here more fully. And we'd like you to consider spending some time at home during your holiday break, my father added. Not out of obligation, but only if it feels right for you. Their approach, offering connection while explicitly acknowledging my autonomy, created space for genuine consideration rather than reactive response. I'd like that, I said after a moment's reflection. Both the visits here and time back east, my schedule is flexible around project deadlines. There's another possibility we wanted to discuss, my father continued, exchanging glances with my mother. We've been considering the idea of establishing a small scholarship fund at RISD, specifically for students pursuing illustration with financial need. The proposal, unexpected yet deeply appropriate, caught me by surprise. That would be some meaningful, I managed, genuinely moved by the symmetry of the gesture. We thought you might have insights about how to structure it most effectively, my mother explained. Given your first-hand experience with both the department and the financial challenges involved, We can't undo our past decisions, my father acknowledged, but perhaps we can create different possibilities for students facing similar obstacles in the future. The initiative, using their resources to support others on paths they had once dismissed, represented perhaps the most significant demonstration of how profoundly their perspective had evolved. This wasn't merely personal reconciliation, but broader recognition of the legitimate value of creative education and artistic development. As Thanksgiving Day unfolded, my small apartment filled with cooking aromas and comfortable conversation, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this improbable reunion. The painful rejection that had once defined my relationship with my parents had transformed gradually into something neither of us could have anticipated. A more authentic connection based on mutual recognition, rather than prescribed expectations. The money had never been meant for someone like me, my father had declared that spring afternoon 4 years earlier. In the most unexpected way, he had been right, though not as he had intended. What had appeared as devastating rejection had become the catalyst for discovering strengths, capabilities, and determination I might never have recognized within more comfortable circumstances. Standing on my balcony that evening, watching the sunset paint the Los Angeles sky in spectacular oranges and pinks, I felt my father's presence beside me before he spoke. "Your mother and I were just commenting on how perfectly you've positioned your living space," he observed, capturing both morning and evening light, essential for an artist, I imagine. "It was the main selling point when I viewed the apartment," I confirmed. "The quality of light here is unlike anything I experienced on the East Coast. It transforms how I see color relationships in my work." He nodded, considering this. "I've been thinking about something you said yesterday, about how our failure to support your education actually forced you to develop strengths you might not have discovered otherwise." "It's true," I acknowledged, though I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as a parenting strategy. He smiled slightly at this, acknowledging the gentle critique. "What strikes me is how differently everything might have unfolded if we had simply supported your RISD application from the beginning, if we had recognized the legitimacy of your vision rather than imposing our limited understanding." "I've thought about that too," I admitted. "The strange paradox that your rejection ultimately contributed to the distinctive perspective that defines my professional success now." "That doesn't justify our failure," he said quietly. "But perhaps it suggests something important about resilience and authentic development. That meaningful growth often emerges from resistance rather than ease." His philosophical framing, seeking meaning rather than simple resolution, reflected genuine evolution in how he engaged with complex emotional terrain. "I think that's true," I agreed. "Though ideally, that resistance comes from the natural challenges of creative development rather than from those who should offer support." "Which is precisely what we're hoping to provide through the scholarship initiative," he acknowledged, "supporting other young artists in developing their authentic voices without the unnecessary struggle you encountered." As the conversation continued, I recognized that we had arrived at something neither of us could have anticipated 4 years earlier. Not the simple restoration of previous relationship, but the creation of something new and potentially more substantial. This wasn't about returning to what had been, but about building connection based on who we had each become through the intervening years of separation and growth. The money had never been meant for someone like me, but in its absence, I had discovered resources within myself far more valuable than financial support: determination, resilience, and unwavering belief in my creative vision. Those internal resources had not only secured my education and launched my career, but had fundamentally shaped my identity and perspective. What had begun as rejection had ultimately led to recognition, not just from my parents, but more importantly, from myself. In denying me the easier path, they had inadvertently directed me toward the more transformative one, a journey that had shaped not only my professional success, but my deeper understanding of authentic achievement and self-defined worth. As We stood together watching the California sunset transform the sky. I realized that the most important reconciliation had not been between my parents and me, but between the competing aspects of my own identity. The wounded daughter seeking approval had evolved into the confident artist creating on her own terms, not in opposition to my family history, but by integrating it into a more complex and authentic self-understanding. The final light of day illuminated both our faces as my father spoke again, his voice reflective. You know, Olivia, watching you create this life, this career, this home, this artistic voice, has fundamentally changed how I understand success. You've taught me more than I could have possibly taught you. In that moment of mutual recognition, something profound completed its transformation. What had begun in rejection had evolved through resilience into genuine reconciliation, not through compromise or surrender, but through the gradual, hard-won understanding that authentic connection emerges only when we truly see each other, across our differences. The money had never been meant for someone like me. And in the most unexpected way, that rejection had become the greatest gift, launching me toward a future defined not by others' expectations, but by my own unmistakable vision. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.